Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs Daily War Room update. Maurice Hirsch together today with Yoni ben Menachem and Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser. We'll start. Today is day 24 of the war, obviously 25 in fact, and we will start as we do with the daily update of how we got here, and after that we'll discuss where we're going forward. We're talking about the massacre that started on the 7th of October, now 26 days ago. It starts with over 3,000 terrorists infiltrating from Gaza into Israel. They swarm the Israeli cities, towns, villages, and kibbutzim adjacent to the border, murdering over 1,400 people, injuring another 5,240, and taking what now appears to be, it's an updated figure also from yesterday, 239 verified cases of hostages taken. As I mentioned yesterday, many of those cases are children under the age of 5 even, and the elderly over the age of 75, all being held by Hamas. Hamas accompanies that initial attack with a barrage of rockets being fired, initially starting with 3,000 rockets. Since then, they have managed to fire another 5,500 rockets. We're standing today with a total of 8,500 rockets that have been fired from the direction of Gaza. Many of those rockets, we have to remember, have fallen inside Gaza itself, killing Palestinians often. And as we saw with the incident of the El Ahli hospital, where a fallen and misfired Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket fell in the courtyard of the hospital. Initially, the Gazan authorities, the Hamas authorities, reported that Israel had directly and intentionally attacked the hospital, killing 500 people. In hindsight, it appears that it was a Hamas/Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket, and the reports of 500 people was more than exaggerated, and it appears that there were no more than a dozen people killed in that attack. The terrorists have continued also trying to infiltrate Israel, with a number of attempts being thwarted by the Israeli authorities, now much more aware of what's going on. And that's where we're standing on the side of the Palestinian terrorist ISIS attacks on Israel. Israel has obviously been responding for the last 3.5 weeks, and we've carried out now, according to IDF information, over 11,500 attacks in Gaza, of them some 450 in the last 24 hours. These are numbers which are quite high, obviously, but they reflect the fact that Hamas and its terror infrastructure was all over Gaza, in houses, under mosques, in mosques, by schools, by UN facilities, by hospitals, and in hospitals. Obviously, everyone is referred to the briefing given by the IDF regarding the Hamas operations and central operations room that is positioned and situated underneath Gaza's biggest hospital, the Shifa hospital, with the intentional and direct purpose of using the hospital and its patients as human shields. That is the common practice of the Hamas and other terrorists in the Gaza Strip. Obviously, there has also been attacks on the extensive Hamas tunnel system in the Gaza Strip, and we've seen a number of occasions where attacks have been happening in one place, and then adjacent to that, the road will then, or the area will then fall in, indicating a strike on these tunnels. There are a reported 450 to 500 kilometers of tunnels under the Gaza Strip, which is quite incredible considering that the entire length of the Gaza Strip is only 40 kilometers. So you have an entire network of tunnels basically under the entire Gaza Strip. That is where, according to the information that's so far been provided, many of the hostages being held by Hamas and the other terrorist organizations are being held. Those other terrorist organizations holding hostages include the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, which is a member organization in the PLO headed by Mahmoud Abbas. That's really on the southern front. Israel's ground forces are still operating on the ground in the Gaza Strip. And yesterday we saw, yesterday evening or 2 nights ago evening, but it was published and released for publication yesterday afternoon after our daily update, that an Israeli soldier who had been kidnapped and held hostage was released by special forces, the ISA together with the IDF, operating in a pinpoint manner to free the soldier. What we've seen also on the northern front, moving up to the north, obviously, is a continuation of this war of attrition that's going on. Hezbollah forces constantly attacking and the IDF responding. There have now been over 50 Hezbollah terrorists killed in those exchanges of fire, and they carried on without a respite. In Judean Samaria, the IDF forces have continued on arresting all of the Hamas leadership in Judean Samaria and hundreds of its terror activists. Some 700 terrorists arrested in the last 3.5 weeks. In Israel, we've managed to, within the Green Line, we've managed to maintain a relative calm, whilst there were initial fears that Israel's Israeli Arab population would potentially join the Hamas onslaught. As of today, that hasn't happened. In fact, according to a poll released just 2 days ago, it would appear that 85% of the Israeli Arab population was also expressed its objection and disgust almost with the events of the 7th of October and the massacre. And so they are trying to distance themselves, although there does appear to be still a small element which is still causing some concern. One of probably the most dominant marker for those events is what's happening on the Temple Mount. And for now, the prayers and the meetings there have continued on without interference. Those are the different immediate levels. Obviously, all of these events being directed and pushed on by Iran. And we have that wider picture that we've discussed before of the Houthis, another Iranian proxy in Yemen, firing all types of missiles, both and rockets and UAVs at Israel, directed at Israel and at other targets, and the Iranian proxies in the north also attacking U.S. bases. Obviously, the massive presence of 2 U.S. aircraft carriers and their fleets in the area is of a significant value also to Israel and to the entire region. That's the update for now. Yoni is going to give us a few extra points, and then we'll go to Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, who we're going to talk to about on the question of to what extent does Hamas represent the Palestinians? What do we see as almost the day after in Gaza, once the war with the terrorists in Gaza is finished and we have annihilated all of that terror presence and their terror infrastructure. So Yoni, give us a few minutes of an update from your side, please, before we go on to Yossi.
I will start with a short remark about your description of the situation with the Israeli Arabs inside Israel. It was 100% correct, but today there was an announcement by the Shin Bet and the police that they arrested 3 Arabs residents from Sakhnin and Arabe who are affiliated with ISIS that were planning some terror attacks during the war. So this is also something we have to think about. I know that they are very quiet this time, the Israeli Arabs. It's a completely different situation from what was on May 2021 when the operation of the Guardian of the Walls. But still, as long as the Israeli military offensive in North Gaza continues, and there is a blackout right now, but in a few days, the Israeli army will allow reporters to go in, and when the real picture will be revealed, I think that this might create some problems also in Israel and among the Israeli Arabs. I cannot go into the details, but I think we should be very careful with our estimation, because the war is only in the beginning now, and we don't know how it will develop, and whether, for instance, Hezbollah will also join the war. Is a speech expected of Hassan Nasrallah on Friday, which will give us a more clear picture about Hezbollah intentions. But still, I think that everything is still open. As for the situation on the ground, there's the blackout, as I said, by the IDF about what is going on in the north of Gaza Strip. But today, the Israeli army spokesperson, he said that there are heavy fightings going on in the north of Gaza between the IDF soldiers and between the Hamas terrorists, and that the Israeli army made a few raids and killed a lot of terrorists and captured weapons and so on. And a few minutes ago, there was also a declaration of Tzachi Hanegbi, the Security Council advisor, who said that the army is finished clearing the north of Gaza Strip, and you cannot do it without something which is very painful. And he hinted, I think, that there are some Israeli casualties. He didn't go into the specifics. So we have to wait and see to get a more clear picture about what is going on. As for the Palestinians, it's very difficult to believe their reports, because they are lying all the time. But I can tell you, this morning I was listening to a TikTok live conversation. You can have live conversation on the TikTok with the people in Gaza. And I was listening very carefully for 2 hours, very early in the morning. And I can tell you that the atmosphere that I heard was an atmosphere of deep despair and deep fear among the Palestinians as a result of what is happening in Gaza. And they are very afraid from the Israeli military invasion to north of Gaza. And they doubt, I think they doubt the announcement of the military wing of Hamas, and they are trying to gather any piece of information to know what is the real situation on the ground and where things are going.
Yes, indeed, Yoni. Thank you. The reports of Israeli Arabs affiliated with ISIS is, of course, of much concern. Just yesterday, I was in the Knesset representing the JCPA, discussing legislation that would focus also on how you avoid, already from the start, exposure to ISIS and other terrorist literature and indoctrination, to try and prevent that slippery slope of getting more and more sucked into that ideology of murder and of destruction. So that's something which already was moving forward yesterday in the Knesset. It's legislation that has been discussed now that has been really on the table for quite an extensive period of time. But yesterday, obviously, given the circumstances, was being pushed forward. Already tomorrow there will be another hearing in the Knesset to almost finish the legislation to the extent that is possible. And so really on that note, I would like to try and move to a more positive note, and to discuss with Yossi the idea of, well, to what extent do or does Hamas represent the Palestinians? We know that on the 13th of September, just a few weeks before the war started, before the massacre, Khalil Shkaki published a survey to mark 30 years since the Oslo Accords. And in that survey, he said that when he asked the Palestinians who would they vote for in the next elections, 44% of the Gazan people said that they would vote for Hamas again. To what extent is that just Hamas or the people feeling that they can't answer anything else? Or to what extent does Hamas really enjoy that wide popular support from the Palestinian people in Gaza?
Thank you for the question. And let me make it clear that the reason I'm referring to this question is not only because as a researcher I'm interested in the answer, but because many people speak about the day after. And Tzachi Negbi, the National Security Advisor, just said in a minute ago that it's too early to discuss the day after, but you cannot avoid discussing the day after when you look at such a big change of situation in Gaza. What's going to be there? And we hear repeatedly from Western leaders, including President Biden himself, that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Well, I beg to differ. There's a big part of the Palestinian people that consider Hamas as their representative. Just as Shkaki made this research, this polling, and reached this conclusion, many people in the Palestinian street believe that this is the case. In any elections that were held recently, Hamas won, not only in the Gaza Strip, but even in the Judea and Samaria territories. In the elections held for the committees leading the universities in the
student union. The student unions.
Sorry?
The student unions.
The student unions, exactly. Hamas won repeatedly the elections, and the feeling in the Palestinian arena is that the reason why Fatah tries to avoid going to elections in the last 18 years is that they understand that if they hold another election, Hamas is going to have even a bigger victory than the one it had in the elections 2005. So this is what worries, or 2006 actually. This is the reason why everybody is so worried about the strength of Hamas. Now, when we look at what happened in the public opinion of the Palestinians after the attacks of October 7th, the support of Hamas grew considerably. There was a polling by Shkaki after the attack, according to which 58%, not 44%, 58% of the Palestinians identified themselves with Hamas. So the support for Hamas is wide and strong and deep. That's what we have to remember.
Interestingly, Yossi.
Just one second. We could have seen it also in the way the people in Gaza reacted to the attacks of to the vicious attacks of October 7th. Some of them followed Hamas into the villages and the communities on the other side, on the Israeli side, and to loot and join Hamas in their vicious activities. And some of them, when the hostages were brought to Gaza, were celebrating and spreading all kinds of sweets to everybody in the neighborhood. So this is the way the Palestinians look at Hamas. Now, even the Fatah says Hamas is a legitimate representative of Palestinians. They have maybe an argument about who is their representative of the Palestinian people. They would note the PLO does. But there's no doubt that Hamas represents a very important part of the Palestinian people. We have to bear that in mind when we speak about the day after.
I just wanted to point out that I think there's two things that should be pointed out. Firstly, since yesterday, the site of the website of Shkaki is down. I think that both Fatah and possibly the Americans are unhappy with the fact that he's exposing the broad support for Hamas amongst the Palestinian people. not only in Gaza, but also in Judah and Samaria. Also, according to that September poll, Hamas would have won the most votes, even in Judah and Samaria, were elections to be held again. And I think that that's something which, for some reason, the American administration seems to be looking to deny and void. But I think that support for Hamas is something which really has been a constant over an extended period of time, really going all the way back to 2006 when they won the elections and continuing on to this day. But why do you think, Yossi, they are so insistent on negating that? Do they think that if they just lie to themselves, well, then everything will be all right? If we impose Abbas on Gaza, well, then maybe there'll be a different result than from what we've seen until now. And we saw even the Palestinian, the PA Prime Minister, Mahmoud Ashtaya, saying that, well, the PA isn't even interested in returning to the Gaza Strip unless it includes some type of permanent state for the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria. In other words, what he says is the PA isn't interested in Gaza unless, as a result of the October 7 massacre, the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinians in general receive a massive upgrade and an actual state. That's what they're hoping, appear to be hoping to receive, is that from the massacre of 1,400 people, they will now be upgraded in the international community. Is that something that you see? Why do you think that the Europeans and the Americans are trying to deny that, Yossi?
Well, first of all, there is this willful blindness. They just don't want to realize the reality. The reality is even worse than that. Not only that Hamas represents a big part of the Palestinian population, but what PA represents is not much better than Hamas. Maybe a little bit better, but not much better. Because they share the same narrative for the Palestinian people, that is a narrative of struggle against Zionism, that is a narrative that denies the existence of a Jewish people, that denies any sovereign history of Jews in this piece of land, that looks at the Jews in a very negative way, very anti-Semitic way, that put the focus on the suffering of the Palestinians, ignoring the needs of the Jewish people, and that denies any readiness to accept Israel's nation state of the Jewish people, and eventually looks for replacing Israel as owners of this land and then entirely. That is the same narrative that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority share. And the international community just doesn't want to know about it, because they feel that this would mean that they have to accept the messages coming from Israel about the difficulty of making peace, the difficulty of ruling Gaza in the future. And they believe that if Israel just defeats Hamas, then the population is going to be very cooperative and looks for peace, and we can bring in a moderate element like the PA, which is not moderate at all. And this is a dream that they've built for themselves, and they just don't want to wake up. It's exactly willful blindness. And this is what we are going to experience once we finish the job of defeating Hamas. All of a sudden, yes, exactly what you were describing. There are going to be all kinds of people who say, okay, let's bring in the PA and give the Palestinians an upgrade to a state of their own, and so on and so forth, without demanding them to change this narrative and accept Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. That is something that is waiting for us in the horizon. We don't know how close this horizon are. In fact, what I think what needs to be done is for the international community to start now realizing that this narrative is the problem, and realizing that they have to do something about this narrative. And if we don't do anything about this narrative, not only that nothing good is going to come out of Israel's victory or expected victory in Gaza, but if we allow any people to any group like Fatah or anything else to govern Gaza, Hamas is going to take over Gaza within a very short period of time. We tried this already once between 1994 and 2007. Didn't work well. Hamas gained more and more power and eventually got rid of Fatah. And this is going to happen again if we are going to let the weak and not very moderate PA take control of the Gaza Strip in the future. So we have to think of something new, something out of the box, and the first and foremost, something that would make sure that this narrative of the Palestinians is replaced with a narrative that supports peace. And changing a narrative is something that's going to take many, many, many years. I'm not able to say how many exactly, but many, many years, at least a generation. And that's what they expect us. It's not, we are going to see some kind of Marshall plans and all these kind of things that will take care of rebuilding Gaza, but it's not about the construction of buildings or infrastructure. It's about the Palestinian narrative that has to be changed and reconstructed. And if this is not going to happen, Israel will have to govern Gaza for a long period of time. And we don't want to govern Gaza too. So we have to start dealing with this problem right after the defeat of Hamas.
I think it's something, Yossi, that we probably have to start working on immediately. And as you know, there are some discussions on the subject already. I think probably the best comparison that should be made in this situation is that Gaza after the war needs to enter an intensive program of denazification, nothing less than that. Similar to what was done in Germany after the Second World War, because the moment the population is so vehemently anti-Israel, so much hate towards Israel, that they're capable of getting up in the morning, going out, massacring 1,400 people when a terrorist phones his father from Gaza and says that, hey, Dad, I've murdered 10 people. His father congratulates him, as does his mother. And that's a society which I would argue has really gone down to the level of Nazi Germany in its hatred for Jews and for Israel, and therefore a program which is which is an equivalent to the denazification of Germany would have to be implemented. It would be a question, obviously, who would run that type of a program. Maybe we would see the Europeans who are so interested in not continuing on in Israeli control there. Maybe they would be willing, I don't know, to teach the French.
I doubt that any foreign power is able to govern Gaza. Definitely not now with this hatred being done. We have to remember this hatred is built on a very long period of time of hate indoctrination and incitement. It's not something that just happened a couple of years ago when Hamas took over. It's the Palestinian Authority textbooks carry the same messages. If the European Union does not stop financing the Palestinian education system until they change these messages, we are going to have the same problem. And letting Fatah and PA control Gaza and keep this indoctrination, where are we heading? It makes no sense. And we have to remember that we're talking about Fatah as a replacement, potential replacement. We have to remember this is the group, this is the organization that pays salaries to terrorists and rewards the terrorists and tells them in advance in a way that solicitor terror, that they can rest assured that they are going to be paid handsome salaries if they carry out an attack and massacre a Jew and then go to the Israeli jail. That's the message coming out from the PA. That is not going to be helpful at all, bringing the PA over there. And we have to start as soon as possible to change this indoctrination system, because otherwise people will keep supporting Hamas. Because the outcome of this hate indoctrination is that if you are more vicious and more cruel, you are doing the right thing. And we also have to remember the difference between Hamas and Fatah is the extent to which they take Islamic messages into their ideology. Both of them are very Islamic, but Hamas is much more Islamic than Fatah. So on top of all these hate indoctrinations that's carried out by Fatah on the basis of nationalistic motives, Hamas adds the Islamic motives as well, and it makes it even worse. And to take care of this deep hatred in the minds of the Palestinians that are exposed to this incitement. So it's we are in front of a very difficult task of dealing with these opinions that were inculcated into the minds of the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, but also in the areas controlled by the Palestinian Authority.
I think
go on, Yoni.
a few remarks. As for the Hamas getting stronger among the Palestinian societies, I think there are two major reasons that we have to also mention. One is the big corruption of the Palestinian Authority that made itself hated by the Palestinian population. And the second thing is the change or the turn that happened in May 2021 in the Guardian of the Wall operation. Hamas since then got more power among the Palestinians, more support on the Palestinian street, because it managed to present itself as the defender of Jerusalem and especially Al-Aqsa Mosque. While the PA is regarded as someone who gave up defending Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is a crucial reason, a crucial element in the way the Palestinians think. Al-Aqsa Mosque is very important for them, and they were very supportive of Hamas for the missiles attack on Jerusalem on May 2021. And also what we saw, this massacre on October 7, is considered among the Palestinians, and I hear, every day I hear them from Gaza. As I told you on the TikTok and on other social networks, they regard this massacre as a historic victory of Islam over the Jews. And this gives a lot of credit to Hamas. And they don't care about the atrocities that Hamas committed. For them, it's a victory, and Hamas is the hero. And it's only, this massacre only increased the support of the people in Gaza in Hamas. As for the day after, what will happen after the Israeli victory and Israel changing or trying to change the reality in Gaza Strip, the political reality, I think the Americans are daydreaming. President Biden, I don't know why he says these things, that the Palestinians do not, that Hamas does not represent the Palestinians or all the Palestinians. And I think he is trying to, address this issue as a political matter, that, if he will say such things, then it will stick, and the people will start to accept his observations. But this is daydreaming. It's obvious that Hamas among the Palestinians is the true representative of the Palestinians, and we talked about the polls that Dr. Shkaki made, and nobody takes seriously Mahmoud Abbas anymore in the PA. They after they haven't been elections for the presidency since 2005, since Mahmoud Abbas was elected as president, and he keeps delaying the elections in Gaza and in the West Bank, blaming Israel for the delay. But he knows pretty well that if there will be elections, he will lose. Fatah will lose in the elections to the parliament, and also to the presidency. This is why he's delaying it. So I think before we talk about the day after, I think that it's very important, it's imperative that Israel will take advantage of this military operation and not only settle for occupying the north of Gaza Strip, but occupying the whole of Gaza Strip in order to eliminate and kill all the Hamas military supporters, not only in the north of Gaza Strip, also in the south, and do the best it can to arrest, kill, and demolish the military infrastructure. This is an opportunity that we have to use, and We have to persuade the Americans to back us on this issue. We have also to remember that the situation in the West Bank, the Judea and Samaria, is also very fragile because Mahmoud Abbas is 88 years old. He's not going to stay for long. He already lost the control on Samaria area. And once he steps down for whatever reason, that can happen any day, then we'll have a problem also who will rule Judea and Samaria. And if we agree to the idea of elections, both in Judea and Samaria and the Gaza Strip, this is a big gamble that we're going to lose because Hamas will be elected by the Palestinians.
Indeed, I think this idea of Hamas not only maintaining its strength, but rather growing in strength after the October 7 massacre is something which is unfathomable to me. Specifically in Gaza, if we're, as you mentioned, Yoni, when the journalists are allowed to go in and see the extent of the destruction in Gaza because of Hamas's infrastructure all over, it'll then be much harder to understand even how the Gazans can still be supportive of Gaza when they've brought such as we've said, another Nakba, another catastrophe on the people of Gaza. And so it's really quite unfathomable how they could.
You have to remember
Israel and the Jews. The hatred to Israel and the Jews is the main cause. They don't care about whether Hamas was a dictatorship and that they oppressed them. All they care is that they hate the Jews and they want to eliminate the state of Israel. This is the main motive for the support for Hamas.
You have to remember in this respect that one of the elements of this narrative that I mentioned before is this component of victimhood. Now, here is another proof of their victimhood, and that's the way it's going to be interpreted and marketed by the Hamas and even by the PA to the Palestinian public. You see, we are victims, and who is responsible for this victimhood? It's not Hamas; it's Israel. The bad Israelis are in charge of all of that. We are trying to protect the Palestinian people in Gaza, providing them humanitarian corridors and humanitarian aid, and asking them to leave the area where the battle is being fought. And the Hamas tries to keep them there as human shields, and still the Palestinian people blames Israel all over the world and in Gaza for what they're suffering. So it's that's the way it's going to be presented and interpreted to the Palestinian public. And it's interesting to see that Mahmoud Abbas even criticized Hamas for that, but his voice sort of evaporated and was not heard anymore. In one case, he criticized Hamas and not anymore. And this is the way this is going to be presented. And Khaled Mashal said in his interview in Al Arabiya that, that's just fine with us to suffer such terrible devastation and destruction of Gaza. That's just fine. This is the sacrifice we have to make in order to win the war against the Jews. And the most important thing is that we managed to kill many Jews. That's the important thing. And that's exactly the way many Palestinians understand what's happening. And I'm not sure this is going to change much their point of view regarding who's in charge of their suffering.
So we actually have two questions from our audience on the subject. I'll just address Barbara Mazol's question. No, the army hasn't released the number of captured terrorists and the number of dead terrorists. We know that there were reports on initially that some 1,500 dead terrorists, or the bodies of 1,500 dead terrorists were collected after the massacre. It's not clear exactly how many people have been arrested. The figures that I give as part of the daily update are the number of terrorists arrested in Judea and Samaria. Exactly how many have been arrested or were arrested on the 7th of October in the vicinity of the massacre, and since then haven't been released by the army.
The numbers that the military gave are about 1,000 bodies that were already collected for terrorists in the Gaza area. And there are still several dozens of bodies that were not identified. Many of them are bodies of terrorists that we cannot say who they were. And on top of that, there are about 100 terrorists who were taken captives and were arrested. That's about the numbers of those who participated in the attack.
Yeah, I've heard and seen different reports on that, anything between a few dozen to 150 in the different reports.
Yes,
I think we
see
around the videos coming out from those interrogations, investigations coming out, which I think only eventually we will be able to understand really how many exactly were arrested. But to the other two questions that came up that are really relevant, that are relevant for the subject of the day after. We'll address them with your permission, one at a time, just quickly. The first one is there any outside Palestinian leadership that could come in and replace both Fatah and Hamas? Someone like Mohammed Dakhlan, is he any less virulent towards Israel? Is he any better for Israel? Is he any better for the Palestinians? To what extent is he corrupt? Yossi.
Well, he's corrupt. To begin with, he's corrupt. And he's not the only leader of the Palestinians that can come out from the outside. He's one of them. Salam Fayyad is another one. But none of them is going to be able to rule Gaza and prevent terror attacks from Gaza. That's the problem. Of course, Dakhlan and even Fayyad, to a large extent, although he has a different point of view on the kind of balance between promoting the quality of life and being committed to the narrative of struggle. But both of them are committed basically to the narrative. And that's why I don't think that these people can really change anything. And unfortunately, Salam Fayyad may be something better than Dakhlan. Dakhlan is more capable in Gaza because he's coming from Gaza. He has some connections over there, but he's maintaining good relations with Hamas. He's not an enemy of Hamas. So he's far from being the person who can take over. There is an interview with him published today in which he says, I don't even want it, and I'm not the person to do that. But this is the case. I would argue on that we should look at another option coming from the outside and cooperate with the Abraham Accords countries and maybe even with Saudi Arabia in bringing them into bigger and deeper intervention in what's going to happen in Gaza in the day after. Dakhlan, by the way, lives in Abu Dhabi and has close ties with the leader, with Mohammed bin Ziyad. But I'm not sure that he's capable of doing that. The Emiratis and the Saudis may consider getting more involved, but they will be very careful in my mind and will be ready to be involved in the economic aspects of the day after, and less so in the political and leadership positions that will be open at the time.
Yoni, do you think that there's any other Palestinian leaders that would possibly be relevant for that position?
No, they are not, and the Palestinians will not accept any leadership that will not be elected in elections. As for Dakhlan, he is the copy of Yasser Arafat, and he is an ally of Hamas, and he also spent time in Israeli jail in the same cell with Mohammed Deif. So we cannot even start thinking about it.
Beyond that, he grew up in Khan Yunis together with the leadership of Hamas. He knows them very well.
He grew up in Khan Yunis refugee camp with Mohammed Deif and with the Sinwar together.
So he's close to them. He's not a replacement for these people.
Yeah.
And what about the idea, gentlemen, of establishing some type of going back to days of yore and maybe the UN appointing some type of Arab mandate over Gaza, to rule and govern there. Do you think that that's something that the Gazans would accept?
The question is not whether the Gazans will accept it, it's a question, but it's not the question. The first and foremost question is, what can we accept? Because any government that's going to be in Gaza should be a government that we can rely upon to prevent any repetition of such terror attacks against the people of Israel emanating from Gaza. That's the most important thing. And I don't think that such a Arab mandate is going to be able to really govern Gaza and do the job in preventing the buildup of another terror organization very similar to Hamas. So we should be very careful about what we wish for. And on top of that, I'm not sure that the Arabs, the Palestinians will accept such an arrangement, because they are looking for, they have already tasted the taste of governing themselves. I don't think that they don't like the taste maybe so much, but they hate even more the possibility that they are going to be ruled by a foreign power.
I mean, the chance of the Gazans that they had to experience self-rule, I think, was very limited from the start. Arafat didn't particularly allow plurality of ideas, either in Gaza or in Jeddah and Samaria, and certainly Hamas hasn't allowed that. So I think the Gazan experience of democracy, let's call it, that was envisaged by the Oslo Accords has been exceptionally short-lived. Maybe the first year of the PA rule in the Gaza Strip.
Later on in 2006, they had elections. Hamas won. Fatah didn't allow Hamas to rule. What happened was Hamas was strong enough in order to kick Fatah out. And ever since then, they have the Hamas that they voted for running their business. We're coming back to the issue of who represents the Palestinians. Hamas represented the Palestinians because he felt justified in kicking the Fatah out because Hamas won the elections. And so that was the arrangement that prevailed until now. It's still prevailing in a way. And we have to realize that they're eating the fruit they have planted this tree that they eat the fruit of.
To what extent, Yossi, and this is really one of the questions that has come up also in the questions. I mentioned previously that I believe that Gaza needs to go through an intense period of denazification, of really trying to get rid of all that evil brainwashing. And Stephen Rothenberg, who's watching us, has asked, well, how does that work when you come to denazify, to get rid of these genocidal ideas from a population, where it isn't only an ideology, but it's also, and here is the question, to what extent is it a part of Islam and of the Islam that this population believes in?
Well, definitely it is. Their interpretation of Islam is very much in line with this kind of narrative that they are supporting and being inculcated with for a very long time. If you look at the way they explain what they're doing, they repeatedly use the verse in Islam, in the Quran that justifies jihad, and that's their way of thinking. By the way, Abu Mazen himself uses the same verse. It's not something that is unique for the Hamas and the supporters in the Gaza Strip. And yes, this is their interpretation of Islam. And it's basically when the Muslim Brotherhood, you know, the Hamas is a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood leaders like Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, who said that it's not a good idea to carry out terror attacks against the West in the West. Nevertheless, he gave permission and encouraged carrying out terror attacks against the Jews in Israel. And so this is their interpretation of Islam.
He authorized the fatwa for suicide bombing.
But he referred specifically to suicide bombing. But of course, suicide bombing is a terror attack that is very harsh. Definitely, anything short of that is justified. He didn't refer to the massacres of what that we witness now because he passed away a year ago. But it's interesting to see what is going to be this reaction. We see that this vicious and then cruel massacre is being supported by many Muslims around the world. You look at all these demonstrations in New York, in Germany, in France, in London. All of these people support this interpretation of Islam, and they think that killing the Jews is perfectly all right. And any way you do it is the right way to do it. And it's amazing to see how deep these beliefs are engraved in the minds of these people. So we have to understand that what we are looking at is an unbelievably difficult task. It's not only a national ideology, it's also a theological ideology that has to be taken care of. And many, even those who don't think this way are very fearful of saying that they don't think this way. Everybody has to say that they accept this interpretation of Islam. If you say that you think differently, you may face severe consequences. So it's a very difficult situation for anybody who try to change it. And to find a preacher, an imam that would say that this is wrong and we should look differently at the situation, it's not going to be easy. And even if there were such imams, they had to leave Gaza. Nobody could stay in Gaza if they had a different opinion. And then later on, they changed their mind again. Look at Mahmoud Abbas, the religious advisor of Abu Mazen. He was originally Hamas supporter and then became PA supporter, and now I can't say where exactly he stands, somewhere in between. So it's so this is the task in front of us is immense, because otherwise you have to rule over a population of more than 2 million people that is totally committed to this interpretation of Islam, and you're going to face daily problems in trying to control this territory.
We have to take another very important point into consideration after talking to Palestinians in Gaza. Any Israeli victory in Gaza Strip, any crash of Hamas and destroying Hamas will be considered by the Palestinians as a big humiliation for the Islam and will make them more bitter and increase the hatred to Israel. This is something we have to understand. So on one hand, this is very important for Israel to have a big victory, and I'm sure Israel will achieve this goal by the IDF. But as for the Palestinians, this will be a big humiliation from the religious point of view and from a political point of view, because they saw this, as I said, they saw this massacre on October 7th as the big victory of Islam over the Jews.
That's gentlemen, I believe that there's so much more to discuss on these subjects, but we're coming close to the end of our time. I owe just one final update both to our audience and maybe just the last few minutes that either of you could maybe just respond. Yesterday we saw that Israel's Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, wrote to Prime Minister Netanyahu and said that he is refusing to transfer to the PA the tax income for the last month, citing the fact that the PA has not condemned the attacks and has really embraced the attacks and condoned them and welcomed them, and so he is unable to transfer that money. It's a substantial amount of money. It's about 925 million shekel almost every month on average since the beginning of the year. How do you think that decision is going to affect the Palestinian Authority, Yossi?
Well, I don't think this decision is going to stand. And I think it's more a political move by the Minister of Finance. And eventually we will be forced to transfer the money to the Palestinian Authority because the Americans are going to intervene. And just like we had to heed to American demands on other issues regarding the humanitarian corridor in Gaza, and this issue as well, I think the Americans are going to intervene because they live in a parallel world. They look at the PA as something that has to be strengthened and definitely not punished. And yes, the PA has not condemned the terror attack, but they didn't actually support it either. So from the point of view of the Americans, we should have to deliver the money. And but Smotrich is going to be able to say that I didn't want to do that. And he's right from the point of view of whether it's the just thing to do. But politically wise, it's going to end up in a different way in my mind. And we've seen it in the past with all kinds of moves that Smotrich did, and eventually had to obey the orders coming from higher echelons.
Yoni, have you seen any response from the Palestinians on this subject, or is it just been quiet?
The Palestinians are sure, the PA, senior PA are sure that Israel will transfer the money. Israel cannot back out from the agreement with President Biden, especially after the support we got from the administration during this war. And we have to remember that these things were agreed upon in the presence of the Americans. There were two security meetings in Aqaba and in Sharm el-Sheikh, and Israel agreed with the Americans' participation, Jordan, Egypt, and the PA to straighten the PA. This was just before the war broke out, just before the massacre. So Israel will have to stick to its commitments, and I don't see Finance Smotrich pulling out of the coalition, nor Itamar Ben-Gvir. So Netanyahu will have to fulfill the commitment to the Americans, and he will transfer the money to the PA.
Well, on that less positive note, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me and joining the update for today. We will be back with you again tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Actually, tomorrow, I apologize. Tomorrow we will be broadcasting at 3 o'clock Israel time, so a little bit earlier for both the East and West Coast in the States, bringing back the time so that we can take account for the fact that Israel has changed its clocks to already cancelled daylight saving time, and America doesn't do so until next week, if I'm not mistaken, on Sunday. So just to make sure that our broadcasts are also convenient and accessible for our American viewers. So tomorrow we will be moving to 3 o'clock in the afternoon Israel time, which I think will return it back to 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. Thank you, Yoni. Thank you, Yossi.